All right. Speaking of, joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Really good to have you on the show. What do you think the most impactful part of the Inflation Reduction Act will be? And what are the challenges moving forward?
Well, all I know is that people's lives are going to get better. We have millions of seniors in this country who are choosing not to take the medications that are prescribed by their doctor because they can't afford it. This bill puts a $2,000 cap, out-of-pocket cost cap on prescription drugs for seniors. We have a planet that is warming at a rate that we just can't sustain. We have kids all around this country who wonder, are the adults going to take this seriously before it's too late? Storms, droughts, wildfires we can't control. We now have an incentive structure in place for renewable energy so that electricity producers are going to start building solar capacity, wind capacity, instead of just more oil-fired and gas-fired power plants. And I guess maybe what's most important to me in the long run is that we've really broken the back of the special interests that used to control Washington, right? There's no more powerful industries in Washington than the gun industry and the oil industry and the drug industry. And for 30 years, they stopped all of this from happening. Clean energy legislation, cap on drug costs, a gun bill. And I'm not saying we got it all done. There's still a lot more work to do. But all of a sudden, you see the possibility of what can happen if you put these sort of special interests on the sideline and just do what's right for people. So obviously a really productive summer. And the bottom line is that people's lives are just going to get better.
Senator, can you talk a little bit about how we got here on the climate change bill? This is something that people in the U.S. have been trying to do since the 1990s, and it has failed time and time again. Subsequent consecutive presidents haven't managed to do it. I mean, clearly, it's a very hot summer. We've seen the fires. We've seen the record-breaking temperatures. And so, in a sense, it's hard to deny the evidence. The Republicans have made some missteps on this. But I'm interested in the strategic thinking around carrots and sticks that took place in this bill. That there seems to be just a different way of thinking about how we can enact legislation that will change the climate, that is not a tax on carbon, but is more of a carrot.
Well, let's go back about 10 years ago when we were looking at a bill that was carrots and sticks, the cap and trade bill. That was a different time. Since then, renewable energy has become more competitive. It is close to price competitive with fossil fuels. And so at this moment, late in the game, we were able to make this transformation with incentives alone. So these incentives really are going to make renewable energy and electric vehicles cost competitive with the old technology. And you are right. There's just no way to avoid the catastrophe right now. Every day you turn on your TV and you see the consequences of climate change. So I think we're just at a moment right now where we have had enough technological development that we just needed those incentives. And of course, the back end great news to all of this is not just that we're going to clean up the climate, but that we're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, right? Some country was going to have all the renewable energy and wind turbine jobs. Now we have a shot to create them in the United States. One estimate says 9 million jobs in and around renewable energy are going to be created in this country in the next 10 years. That's awesome news.
Senator, hi, it's Peter Baker. Just wanted to ask you, what do you think this means at this point for the arc of the Biden presidency? He's been struggling for many months with low poll numbers, with tough economic news that mixed with some good economic news. What do you think the spate of legislation in the last couple of weeks, along with other progress that he's made, does for his position with the public, does for the overall story of where his presidency is going at this point?
I think there are a couple things going on here. I mean, first of all, Americans elected Joe Biden to have a steady hand on the wheel. And they also wanted somebody that could reach out and work with Republicans. You talked about all the missteps for Republicans, but it is also extraordinary how many of these pieces of legislation did end up passing with bipartisan support, whether it be the guns bill or the veterans bill. And that's in part why people elected Joe Biden. I think there's now a reminder of why you invested in somebody who could reach out to Republicans. At the same time, I actually think this election is going to be much more so about the radical direction of the Republican Party than it might be about these accomplishments. These accomplishments will help. But if you really see what's motivating voters right now, it's choice, right? It's the idea that the government is going to be in charge of their body if Republicans stay in charge of Washington. This radical direction on democracy, the Republican Party coming to the defense of the rioters on January 6th. So I think we've got to go out and talk about everything that's good good in this bill, but I also think a lot of voters right now are motivated just as much by the direction they've seen the Republican Party take.
Senator, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. On that theme of Republicans opposing things that have such broad popular support, we talk about the PACT Act, the CHIPS Act, and then over the weekend, so many of them voting against the ability to cap insulin prices. Tell us your reaction to that and where that goes from here. Can that be something that's revisited either this fall or after January 1?
So I think there's going to be enormous backlash against Republicans for blocking this price cap on insulin. 7 million Americans are on insulin. For folks that are watching that are in that group, you know how unaffordable it's become. And what we're trying to do here is just put a $35 cap on insulin, not just for folks on Medicare, but for everybody in this country. And we got close to passing it last night. A few Republicans joined us, but not enough to overcome that 60-vote barrier. I think this will be similar to what Republicans did on the veterans bill. They opposed the veterans bill. There was just an outpouring of opposition. They realized that they just couldn't sustain explaining why they were voting against veterans benefits, and they came back to the table to try to get something done. And I think the same thing may be able to happen here. I just don't think folks are going to understand why Republicans won't stand up against the drug industry.
It's really crazy. I mean, listen, if I were running, I would just show the headlines. It's because it's crazy. Against vets, for China, against being competitive against China, for China, against 10-year-old girls being able to flee having to flee their states, actually wanting them to flee their states, and for forcing them to have their rapist's baby, against safeguards to stop moms from dying on operating tables in the state of Texas, against diabetics who can't afford to pay for the price gouging from Big Pharma. I mean, again, it just keeps mounting up. I was going to ask you the question, how big of a win is this for the Democratic Party? But I feel compelled after hearing Jonathan Lemire's question to ask, how big of a loss is this for Republicans who keep going against issues that the overwhelming majority of Americans support? Like, for instance, 90% of Americans supporting universal background checks.
Yeah, so I think that's really the most important point here. Sometimes when Democrats come into the White House, they have a temptation to do things that are really important, but maybe not universally popular. What the Biden administration and this Congress has decided to do is just put legislation on the floor of the Senate that is crazy popular, whether it be changes in our gun laws, helping veterans, lowering the cost of drugs, even the increase on taxes for corporations, hugely popular amongst Republicans and Democrats. Republicans have this reflexive reaction to be against everything that Biden's for, everything that Democrats are for. I mean, that's not good for democracy, but it's not good for them, because what we've done is put things on the floor of the Senate that everybody out there likes, that's going to help tons of people, Republicans and Democrats. And as I said, this election, I think, will be motivated by what we've done, but also by this just deep discomfort that Republicans seem to be a little lost in terms of what they're actually for. It's very clear about what they're against, and it's really popular stuff.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. It's clickbait. Senator Chris Murphy, thank you so much. Really appreciate your being on this morning.